I'd like to report a fire hazard at 784 Saguaro Ridge Drive. The homeowner has installed an illegal solar panel system, endangering the entire neighborhood.
That's the complaint the HOA president filed with the Chandler Fire Department on a Monday morning. 2 fire investigators responded. They spent 3 hours inspecting my roof, my conduit, my inverter, and every wire in my system. They found 0 violations, full compliance, textbook installation, but they did find something else. On the east side of my property, running under the fence and into the complainant's garage, was an unauthorized electrical splice. No permit, no breaker, no code compliance, connected to a $100,000 Tesla charging on my stolen electricity. The woman who reported me as a fire hazard had created the only actual fire hazard on the block, and she had no idea that I'm a licensed master electrician who'd been documenting her theft for 6 months. Tell me, what would you do? But to understand how we got to that moment, the investigators in my yard, the illegal splice under my fence, the $100,000 Tesla charging on stolen power, you need to hear this from the beginning. My name is Garrett Holloway, and 3 years ago, I thought starting over meant the hard part was behind me. My wife Elena passed from stage 4 lung cancer on a Wednesday morning in March. She'd never smoked a day in her life. The oncologist called it genetic. I called it the worst thing that ever happened to me. She was 39. After the funeral, I sold our house in Flagstaff, packed up everything I could fit in a U-Haul, and drove south to Chandler with my 12-year-old son, Colton, sitting shotgun and a box of Elena's recipe cards wedged between us on the bench seat. Chandler sits about 20 minutes southeast of Phoenix. Desert heat, beige stucco, and HOA signs on every corner. We moved into a 3-bedroom ranch on Saguaro Ridge Drive, a quiet cul-de-sac in a development called Desert Bluff Estates. The street smelled like creosote bushes and warm asphalt, and the sky was so wide and blue it felt like someone had peeled the ceiling off the world. I'm a licensed master electrician, 22 years in the trade. I've wired hospitals, schools, data centers, and about 400 residential homes across northern Arizona. When I looked at the roof of that ranch house, south-facing, 40-degree pitch, 0 shade, I saw the cleanest solar setup I'd ever dreamed of. So I pulled permits from Maricopa County, ordered a 24-panel array with dual microinverters, and spent 3 weekends on the roof bolting everything down while Colton handed me tools from the ladder. The system was beautiful. Clean lines, flush-mounted, matte black panels that blended with the roof tiles. I ran the conduit tight against the fascia. Every connection was rated, labeled, and photographed for the inspection file. The county inspector signed off without a single correction. I was generating enough power to run the house, charge my work truck, and push surplus back to the grid for credit. For the first time since Elena died, I felt like I was building something instead of losing it. Then I met Tammy Bridgewater. She showed up on my porch the second Tuesday after we moved in. Blonde hair pulled tight in a clip. White linen blazer over black yoga pants. Designer sunglasses pushed up on her forehead like a crown. She was carrying a leather portfolio and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Behind her, a white Tesla Model X sat in my driveway with the falcon wing doors still open, like it was posing for a magazine shoot. "Welcome to Desert Bluff," she said. "I'm Tammy, president of the Homeowners Association, 9 years running." She handed me a folder full of CC and R documents and pointed at my roof. "Those panels, did you get board approval before installation?" I told her I'd pulled permits from the county. She shook her head slowly, the way a teacher shakes her head at a child who gave the wrong answer on purpose. "County permits don't mean anything here, sweetheart. Everything visible from the street goes through the Architectural Review Committee. That's me." I didn't argue. I just nodded and said I'd look into it. She smiled again, tucked her portfolio under her arm, and walked back to her Tesla like she'd just delivered a verdict. 2 weeks later, I got the first letter, a $200 monthly fine for aesthetic non-compliance of my solar panel installation. The letter cited Section 4.7.2 of the C&RS, a clause about rooftop additions that alter the visual character of the streetscape. I pulled up Arizona Revised Statutes and found ARS, Section 33-1816, which prohibits HOAs from banning solar energy devices. The law was crystal clear, but Tammy didn't care about state law. She cared about control. And that fine, that was just the opening move. The fine letters kept coming. $200 a month, like clockwork. Every envelope had the same letterhead, Desert Bluff Estates Homeowners Association, and every envelope carried Tammy's signature at the bottom in blue ballpoint with a little flourish underneath, like she was autographing a fan letter. I paid the first one just to keep the peace, wrote "under protest" on the check, and mailed it with a copy of ARS 33-1816 stapled to the back. The next month, the fine doubled, $400. The letter said I had failed to submit a remediation plan. I hadn't submitted one because there was nothing to remediate. My panels were legal, my permits were valid, my system passed county inspection. But Tammy Bridgewater wasn't operating on legal ground. She was operating on ego. That second month is when I noticed the numbers. I tracked my solar production obsessively. It's what electricians do. We measure everything. My system was rated to produce about 38 kilowatt hours per day in summer. The inverter dashboard confirmed I was hitting that number almost every afternoon. But my utility credit wasn't matching. I should have been pushing 12 to 15 kilowatt hours back to the grid daily. Instead, I was pushing 4, sometimes less. I checked the inverter, clean. I checked the panel connections, tight. I checked the breaker panel inside the house. Everything looked normal, but something was pulling power from my system before it ever reached the meter. On a Saturday morning in late June, I walked the conduit line from the roof to the ground-level junction box on the east side of the house. The Arizona sun was already brutal by 8 a.m., the kind of heat that makes your boots stick to the driveway and turns every metal surface into a branding iron. I crouched down next to the junction box and popped the cover. That's when I saw it. Someone had spliced a 10-gauge copper line off my main solar feed, run it through a gray PVC conduit along the base of my fence, under the decorative gravel between our properties, and straight into Tammy Bridgewater's garage. The splice was ugly. No junction box at the tap point, no weatherproof connectors, no breaker protection, just bare copper twisted together and wrapped in black electrical tape like a high school science project. I followed the conduit to her side. It terminated at a NEMA 1450 outlet, the kind you use for a level 2 EV charger. Sitting in her garage, plugged into that outlet, was her white Tesla Model X. The charge indicator on the dash was glowing green. She was charging a $100,000 car on my electricity, using wiring that wouldn't pass inspection in a garden shed. I stood there for a long time. I could feel the heat radiating off the gravel through my boots. I could hear the faint hum of the inverter behind me and the tick-tick-tick of her Tesla's charge relay cycling on the other side of the fence. My first instinct was to cut the line, pull it right out of my junction box, and leave the bare wire hanging in the sun. But I didn't. Instead, I went inside, poured a glass of water, sat down at the kitchen table, and opened a fresh notebook. I wrote down the date, the time, the gauge of the wire, the lack of code compliance, and the license plate of the Tesla. Then, I took 47 photographs, every angle, every splice, every inch of conduit. The next morning, I knocked on Tammy's door. She answered in a silk robe and reading glasses, holding a mug that said, "Queen of Everything." "I found the tap," I said. "You're pulling from my solar feed. I need you to disconnect it." She didn't blink. She took a sip from her mug and said, "The HOA has shared utility easement rights over common infrastructure. Your solar system feeds into the community grid. I'm simply accessing my share." "That's not how easements work," I said, "and that wiring violates about 14 sections of the National Electrical Code." She tilted her head. "Are you threatening me, Mr. Holloway?" "I'm informing you." "Well," she said, leaning against the doorframe, "consider yourself informed that your fines just went up to $500 a month. Have a blessed day." She closed the door. Through the wood, I heard her deadbolt click shut like a period at the end of a sentence. I walked back to my house, sat down at the kitchen table again, and wrote down everything she'd said, word for word. Then I looked up a term I hadn't thought about since trade school: utility theft, under Arizona revised statutes. Section 13-1802, theft of utilities, including electricity, is a Class 6 felony if the value exceeds $1,000. And by my math, at 34 cents per kilowatt hour at peak rate, she had already crossed that line 3 months ago. So I closed the notebook, filed the photos on a backup drive, and started doing what I do best: measuring, documenting, waiting. Over the next 6 weeks, Tammy Bridgewater went from annoying to dangerous. It started with the permit. I'd filed for a routine renewal on my solar installation through Maricopa County. Standard procedure, nothing complicated. The county website showed pending review for 2 weeks, then 3, then 4. I called the permitting office and asked a clerk named Wendell what the holdup was. He got quiet for a second and said, "Mr. Holloway, your application has been flagged for additional Planning Commission review. I can't tell you more than that." Planning Commission. That meant Darren Bridgewater, Tammy's husband. He was a mid-level member of the Maricopa County Planning and Zoning Commission. Not a chairman, not a director. Just a guy with enough pull to slow walk a residential solar permit into bureaucratic purgatory. And I knew, the way you know weather is coming when the air pressure drops, that Tammy had picked up the phone and asked her husband to make my life harder. The permit stalled for 9 weeks. During those 9 weeks, I was technically operating a solar system without current authorization. And during those 9 weeks, Tammy sent me 3 more letters, each one referencing the lapsed permit as evidence that my installation was illegal and uninsured. But that wasn't the worst of it. On a Thursday afternoon in August, I came home from a job site in Tempe to find 2 men in khaki pants and desert tan polo shirts standing in my side yard with clipboards. They were photographing my junction box, my conduit runs, and the meter panel. One of them had opened the junction box cover, the same cover I'd bolted shut after documenting the illegal tap. "Can I help you?" I asked, setting down my tool bag on the porch. My voice was calm. Inside, I was running hot. The taller one flashed a laminated badge that said, "Desert Bluff Estates, Compliance Inspector." No state seal, no county logo, just an HOA badge designed to look official. "We're conducting a routine infrastructure audit," he said. "Ms. Bridgewater authorized the inspection." "She authorized you to enter my property?" "Common areas and shared utility access points are subject to board review per Section 8.3 of the C&RS. I'd read Section 8.3. It covered common areas, parks, pools, sidewalks. It did not cover the side of my house. These men were trespassing. "Gentlemen," I said, "you're standing on private property without my permission. I need you to step off my land right now." They looked at each other. The shorter one started to argue, but I held up my phone. "I'm recording this conversation. You have 30 seconds. They left, but not before the shorter one muttered, just loud enough for me to hear, "Lady said you'd be difficult." That night, after Colton went to bed, I pulled up my solar monitoring dashboard on the laptop. The numbers made my stomach drop. My daily production was 38 kilowatt hours, same as always. But my net consumption, the power actually reaching my home, had dropped to 19. Nearly half my output was being siphoned through that illegal tap. I zoomed into the hourly graph. There were 3 distinct charging peaks, one at 6 a.m., one around noon, and one at 11 p.m. Tammy's Tesla was charging around the clock, but the noon peak was larger than the others, much larger, the kind of draw you'd expect from 2 vehicles charging simultaneously. I walked out to the fence line at midnight. The air had finally cooled enough to feel almost human, that dry desert night air that smells like dust and sage and carries sound like a wire. I could hear the hum of at least 2 charging units cycling in Tammy's garage. I peeked through the fence slat. 2 Teslas, hers, the white Model X, and a red Model 3 I'd never seen before. There was a handwritten sign taped to the wall above the outlet. "EV charging, DBE residents welcome. See Tammy B." She wasn't just stealing my electricity anymore. She was running a free charging station for her friends. On my power, through wiring that could start a fire in the middle of the night, with my son sleeping 40 feet away. I took photographs through the fence, time-stamped, GPS tagged. Then I went back inside, sat at my kitchen table, and added a new section to my growing file. I labeled it "Pattern of Unauthorized Commercial Use." Below that, I wrote one question to myself. How far does she think she can go? The answer, it turned out, was a lot further than I expected, and a lot further than the law would tolerate. September brought monsoon clouds and a new level of aggression from Tammy Bridgewater. The first sign was the petition. She'd circulated a document titled "Protect Desert Bluff's Visual Integrity," a fancy way of saying she wanted solar panels banned from every roof in the neighborhood. 43 homeowners signed it. Most of them had no idea what they were signing. The petition claimed that rooftop solar installations depreciate property values, create electromagnetic interference, and pose a fire risk to adjacent homes. Every single claim was false, but fear doesn't need facts. It just needs a confident woman with a clipboard and a concerned tone. The petition landed on my doorstep inside a manila envelope with a sticky note on top. In Tammy's handwriting it read, "Thought you should see this. The neighborhood has spoken." I peeled the note off and stuck it in my file. Evidence of intent. Then I read the petition. The language was surprisingly polished, too polished for Tammy. At the bottom of the last page, in small print, I found the name of the law firm that had drafted it, Kelsey & Lowe, P.C. I looked them up. They were a real estate litigation boutique out of Scottsdale. Their managing partner, Gretchen Kelsey, listed HOA enforcement and covenant compliance as her primary practice area. Tammy had lawyered up. The cease and desist arrived 3 days later. It was addressed to me personally, printed on Kelsey & Lowe letterhead, and demanded that I immediately decommission and remove all rooftop solar collection devices, or face legal action for ongoing aesthetic violations, unauthorized utility modifications, and endangerment of community electrical infrastructure. The letter gave me 14 days to comply. I read it twice. The second time, I smiled. Because I noticed something the lawyers probably hoped I wouldn't. The letter threatened action under Section 4.7.2 of the CC and RS, but it didn't cite ARS 33-1816, the state statute that explicitly prohibits HOAs from restricting solar installations. Any competent Arizona attorney would have addressed that statute head-on, either arguing an exception or acknowledging the limitation. Kelsey & Lowe didn't mention it at all. Either they didn't know about it, or they were hoping I didn't. I pulled up the Arizona State Bar website and searched for Gretchen Kelsey's license status, active, but her practice address was listed in Nevada. I dug deeper. Kelsey & Lowe, P.C. was incorporated in Nevada. They had no physical office in Arizona. And Gretchen Kelsey's Arizona bar admission, it was a limited pro-hack vice status that had expired 18 months ago. The law firm sending me a cease and desist to remove my legally protected solar panels was not licensed to practice law in the state of Arizona. I saved that screenshot, printed it, and added it to the file. But Tammy wasn't done. The week after the cease and desist, she called an emergency HOA board meeting. I sat in the back row of the community clubhouse while she stood at the front in a navy blue blazer and white pants, clicking through a slide presentation titled Infrastructure Safety Concerns. The room was packed, maybe 60 people. The air conditioning was struggling against the crowd, and the room smelled like stale coffee and carpet cleaner. Her presentation claimed my solar system was overtaxing the neighborhood's shared electrical grid and creating a documented fire hazard. She showed photographs of my junction box, the ones her fake inspectors had taken from my side yard without permission. She proposed a special assessment of $1,500 per household to upgrade community electrical infrastructure and mitigate the risk created by Mr. Holloway's unauthorized installation. $1,500 per household to fix a problem that didn't exist, to punish me for generating my own electricity. I didn't speak during the meeting. I sat in my chair, took notes, and watched the room. Most people looked confused. A few looked angry. At me. One woman in the third row kept glancing back at me like I'd personally endangered her family. After the meeting, a man named Ward Pemberton approached me in the parking lot. He was mid-60s, retired, with a deep tan, and the kind of handshake that tells you he built things for a living. "I've been on this board for 3 years," he said quietly, "and I've been asking to see the financials for 2. She won't show them to anyone." "Why not?" He looked over his shoulder, then back at me. "Because I think she's got something to hide, and I think whatever she's doing with your electricity is just the tip of it." That night, I filed my first formal request under ARS 33-1805, the Arizona statute that gives every homeowner the right to inspect their HOA's financial records. The law requires the association to produce the records within 10 business days. Tammy's response? She sent me a letter saying the request was under review by the board's legal counsel, the same counsel who wasn't licensed to practice in Arizona. The clock was ticking. And for the first time since this started, it was ticking in my direction. The records arrived on a Tuesday, 11 days after my request. one day past the legal deadline. They came in a cardboard banker's box, left on my porch with no note. Inside were 3 years of HOA financial statements, meeting minutes, vendor invoices, and bank reconciliation reports. I carried the box to my kitchen table, made a pot of coffee, and started reading. Colton was at school. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the faint click of the air conditioner cycling on. I didn't leave that table for 6 hours. The first thing I found was a budget line item I'd never seen referenced in any meeting minutes. It was labeled Community Utility Infrastructure Fund, Phase 2. According to the ledger, this fund had received annual deposits of $17,000, $17,500, and $17,800 over the past 3 fiscal years. Total, $52,300. I searched for invoices tied to those expenditures. There were none. No contractor bids, no purchase orders, no inspection reports, no receipts. $52,000 had been allocated to a project that, as far as the paperwork showed, didn't exist. Then I found the bank statements. The fund transfers didn't go to a vendor. They went to an account ending in 4417. I cross-referenced that number against the HOA's operating accounts. It wasn't one of them. I searched the statement footnotes. Nothing. But on one of the older reconciliation reports, someone had handwritten a note in the margin, probably a bookkeeper who'd since been replaced. The note read, Per T. Bridgewater, Personal Reimbursement Account. Tammy had been funneling HOA money into her own bank account for 3 years, using a fake infrastructure fund as cover. I sat back in my chair and let that settle. $52,000. Stolen from homeowners who were paying their dues in good faith, trusting that the money would go toward pools and landscaping and road repairs. Instead, it went into Tammy's pocket, and the shared utility easement she'd invented to justify tapping my solar system, that was part of the same lie. The fund she cited didn't fund anything. It was a shell. But there was more. As I kept reading, I found a series of emails printed and filed in the meeting, minutes from 18 months ago. They were between Tammy and a commercial real estate developer named Clayton Mercer. The emails discussed a proposed mixed-use development on a vacant parcel adjacent to Desert Bluff Estates. Mercer needed a zoning variance from the County Planning Commission. The emails showed Tammy promising to ensure favorable board support for the project and to manage resident concerns in exchange for a community partnership contribution of $25,000. The zoning variance had been approved. The Planning Commission vote was 4-3. One of the 4 yes votes was Darren Bridgewater. Tammy's husband had voted to approve a development project that his wife had been paid $25,000 to support. That wasn't a community partnership. That was a bribe funneled through the HOA president to influence a public official's vote. I closed the banker's box. My hands were steady, but my heart was pounding. I had $52,000 in embezzlement, $25,000 in what looked like public corruption, a law firm that wasn't licensed to practice in Arizona, a solar tap that constituted felony utility theft, and a woman who thought she was untouchable. I picked up the phone and called Ward Pemberton. He answered on the second ring. "Ward," I said, "I found what she's been hiding, and it's worse than either of us thought." Over the next 3 weeks, I moved carefully. Not fast, not loud, just precise. The first thing I did was upgrade my solar system. I'd been planning the expansion for months anyway. 8 additional panels, a second microinverter, and a next-generation charge controller that could handle 60 kilowatt hours of daily output. I filed the permit application with Maricopa County, and this time, I didn't go through the regular queue. I walked the paperwork directly to the county building department and handed it to a supervisor named Dolores Vega, who reviewed my engineering drawings, checked my master electrician license, and stamped the permit in 40 minutes. "This is textbook," she said, flipping through my spec sheets. "Cleanest residential solar application I've seen this year." With the new permit in hand, I spent 2 weekends on the roof with Colton. He was getting good with a torque wrench. We bolted down the new panels, wired the microinverter, and tested every connection with a megger. The system was now rated for 62 kilowatt hours at peak, nearly double the original output. Here's the thing about electrical systems that most people don't understand. When you increase the output of a solar array, you increase the voltage and amperage flowing through every wire connected to that system. If those wires are properly rated, which mine were, they handle it fine. But if someone has spliced an unauthorized line off your feed using 10-gauge copper with no breaker protection and no weatherproof connectors, that line becomes a bottleneck. The current flowing through it generates heat, the tape melts, the insulation breaks down, and eventually something starts to burn. I didn't touch Tammy's illegal tap. I didn't modify it. I didn't even look at it during the installation. But I did something else. I sent her a letter. Certified mail. Return receipt requested. The letter stated in clear professional language that I had upgraded my solar array to a higher output configuration. It explained that any unauthorized connections to my system were not rated for the new voltage and amperage levels. It warned that continued use of any non-code compliant tap could result in overheating, equipment damage, or fire. And it demanded, again, that she immediately remove the unauthorized connection from my junction box. I kept a copy. I photographed the certified mail receipt. I filed both in my growing archive. The letter was not a threat. It was a liability shield. If something went wrong with her illegal wiring, I needed the record to show that I had warned her, in writing, with proof of delivery. Every licensed electrician knows this principle. If you see a hazard and you document it, you're protected. If you see a hazard and you stay silent, you share the liability. The second thing I did was file a formal complaint with the Arizona Registrar of Contractors. The unauthorized electrical work on my property, the splice, the conduit, the outlet, had been done without a license, without a permit, and without my consent. Under Arizona law, performing unlicensed electrical work on someone else's property is a Class 1 misdemeanor. If that work causes injury or property damage, it escalates. The third thing I did was contact the Maricopa County Attorney's Office. I mailed them a package, copies of the HOA financial records, the fraudulent budget line, the bank transfers to the personal account, the emails between Tammy and Clayton Mercer, and the Planning Commission vote showing Darren's conflict of interest. I included a cover letter explaining the pattern and requesting an investigation. The fourth thing I did was call a reporter. Her name was Shelley Caldwell. She worked for the Arizona Republic and covered local government and HOA disputes. I'd seen her byline on 3 stories about HOA board corruption in the East Valley. I told her what I had. She asked for documentation. I sent her everything, redacted to protect the other homeowners, but complete enough to tell the story. "This is solid," she said on the phone. "If half of this checks out, it's front page." The fifth thing I did was the simplest. I installed 3 additional security cameras, one on the junction box, one covering the fence line, one with a wide-angle view of both driveways, all hardwired, all backed up to a cloud server, all recording 24 hours a day. Then I waited, not because I was patient, because I was ready. Every wire was connected, every document was filed, every camera was rolling. The system, my system, the real one, the one that had nothing to do with solar panels, was fully operational. All Tammy had to do was keep being Tammy. Tammy found out about the solar upgrade before the new panels were even fully wired. I don't know who told her. Maybe she saw the truck from the supply house. Maybe one of her neighbors texted her a photo. But the morning after I finished the install, she marched across the gravel strip between our properties and stood at the edge of my driveway with her arms crossed and her phone in her hand. "You can't add panels without board approval," she said. "I'm reporting this as an unauthorized modification." I held up the county permit. Already approved by Maricopa County, state law preempts HOA restrictions on solar installations. You know that. She looked at the permit like it was written in a language she refused to learn. Then she took a photo of my roof and walked back to her house without another word. 3 days later, the fire marshal showed up. His name was Lieutenant Dale Swanson. He was a tall, thin man with a graying mustache and the kind of calm that comes from spending 30 years walking into buildings that are actively on fire. He told me he'd received a complaint alleging that my solar installation was a fire hazard. "Who filed the complaint?" I asked, even though I already knew. "Anonymous," he said. "But between you and me, anonymous complaints in HOA neighborhoods usually come from the same address." I gave him full access. Roof, conduit, junction box, inverter, breaker panel, everything. He spent 2 hours going through my system with a thermal imaging camera and a voltage tester. He checked every connection, every wire gauge, every grounding point. When he was done, he sat on my porch with a glass of water and wrote up his report. "Your system is one of the cleanest residential solar installs I've inspected this year," he said. Full compliance, no findings. I thanked him. Then I said, "While you were at the junction box, did you happen to notice anything on the east side?" He set down his glass. "You mean the unauthorized splice running under the fence?" "I do. I noted it in my report," he said. "That wiring is a code violation. Non-rated conductors, no overcurrent protection, no permit on file. Whoever did that work created a genuine fire hazard." He paused. "Your system isn't the problem, Mr. Holloway. That splice is." The fire marshal's report was filed with the county that same week. And just like that, the complaint Tammy had weaponized against me became a paper trail pointing directly back at her. She must have sensed the ground shifting because her next move was pure desperation. She called an emergency board meeting, the second one in 2 months, to propose a special assessment specifically targeting homes with solar installations. The assessment would be $4,500 per household, designated for fire mitigation and electrical infrastructure review. Only 3 homes in Desert Bluff had solar panels. The assessment was aimed like a rifle. I attended the meeting, so did Ward Pemberton. So did about 70 other homeowners who were getting tired of emergency meetings that always seemed to cost them money. The clubhouse was standing room only. Someone had brought a box fan because the AC couldn't keep up, and it sat in the corner buzzing like an angry wasp. Tammy stood at the podium in a cream-colored blazer and pearl earrings, clicking through another slide deck. She used the words safety and community protection 14 times in 11 slides. She never mentioned that the fire marshal had cleared my system. She never mentioned that the actual hazard he'd found was connected to her property. A ward stood up during the comment period. "Tammy, can you explain why the fire marshal's report found a code violation on the east side of Mr. Holloway's property, running toward your garage?" The room went quiet. Tammy's smile didn't break, but her grip on the podium tightened until her knuckles went white. "That's a separate matter," she said. "We're discussing community safety tonight." "That seems relevant to me," Ward said. He sat down. Half the room was looking at Tammy differently now. The vote on the special assessment failed. 31 to 29, close, too close. But it failed. After the meeting, Tammy walked past me in the parking lot. She didn't stop. She didn't make eye contact, but she said something under her breath, just loud enough for me to hear. "You have no idea what I'm willing to do." I believed her. But by that point, I had a fire marshal's report, a county permit, an attorney general complaint in process, and a reporter who was already fact-checking. Whatever Tammy was willing to do, the system I'd built was ready for it. The thing about desperate people is that they don't get smarter, they get faster and sloppier. 3 days after the failed special assessment vote, I got a call from a man named Ray Ontiveros at the Maricopa County Building Department. Ray was the senior electrical inspector assigned to my area. I'd met him twice during routine inspections, and he struck me as the kind of guy who'd rather eat a cold sandwich at his desk than play politics. "Mr. Holloway," he said, "I want you to know that someone contacted my office yesterday and offered to make a contribution to my daughter's college fund if I would flag your solar permit for revocation." I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. "Who?" "I can't say officially, but the call came from a number registered to the Desert Bluff Estates HOA office line. I declined the offer and reported it to my supervisor. I'm also filing a formal referral with the county ethics board." Tammy had tried to bribe a county inspector, not through a lawyer, not through a proxy, through the HOA office phone, with her name practically stamped on the caller ID. It was the kind of mistake that only happens when someone believes they're so far above consequences that the rules have stopped applying. "Ray," I said, "thank you for telling me." "Just doing my job," he said. "Your permit is clean. Nobody's revoking anything." I hung up and added the call to my file. Date, time, substance, Ray's full name and title. Then I emailed Ward Pemberton and told him what had happened, leaving out Ray's name but including the key detail. Someone from the HOA office had attempted to bribe a county official. Ward's response was 4 words. "She's losing her mind." He was right, and she was about to prove it. The following week, I came home to find my mailbox empty. Not empty as in no mail, empty as in gone. The post was snapped at the base, and the box itself was lying in the oleander bushes near the curb. The metal was dented like someone had hit it with a bat. I found tire tracks on the gravel shoulder, wide tracks, the kind a Tesla Model X leaves when you pull too close and clip something on your way out. I didn't call the police, not yet. I photographed the damage, pulled the security camera footage, and confirmed what I'd suspected. At 2:17 in the morning, a white Tesla Model X had pulled up to my curb, stopped for 11 seconds, and then accelerated through my mailbox. The driver's face wasn't visible, but the license plate was. It matched Tammy's vehicle registration. And the Falcon Wing door had been dented on the passenger side since last month, a detail clearly visible in the footage. But Tammy's most dangerous move was the quietest one. I'd noticed something in my monitoring data. The illegal tap was still active. She hadn't disconnected it despite my certified letter. But the usage pattern had changed. Instead of 3 charging peaks per day, there was now 1 sustained draw running almost continuously from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. The load was higher than before, much higher, like she was charging 3 or 4 vehicles overnight. I walked the fence line one evening at dusk. The sky was turning that impossible shade of copper and violet that only the Sonoran Desert produces, and the air smelled like warm stone and mesquite. Through the fence slats, I could see Tammy's garage door was open. Inside were 4 vehicles plugged into a makeshift charging station, her white Model X, a red Model 3, a gray Model Y, and a blue Rivian R1T. Extension cords ran from the NEMA outlet I'd identified months ago to a power strip daisy-chained into a second power strip. The setup looked like a fire hazard designed by committee. But here's what got me. On the back wall of the garage, above the outlet, someone had taped a printed sign. Desert Bluff Green Energy Co-op, powered by Community Solar. Below it was a QR code linking to a Venmo account. She was charging people money to use my stolen electricity. She'd turned felony utility theft into a small business. I took photographs, I recorded video, I noted the makes and models of all 4 vehicles, and the Venmo handle on the sign. Then I went home, uploaded everything to my cloud backup, and sent a final update to Shelley Caldwell at the Arizona Republic and the Maricopa County Attorney's investigator assigned to my case. The trap was set. Every wire was live. All that remained was for the current to do what current always does when you overload a circuit. Find the weakest point and burn through it. The fire started on a Friday night in October. I was sitting on my back patio with Colton, watching the last light drain out of the sky, when I heard a sound I'd been half expecting for months. A sharp pop, like a light bulb bursting, followed by the acrid smell of burning plastic. Then a second pop, louder. Then the smoke alarm in Tammy's garage began screaming. I stood up. Through the fence, I could see gray smoke pouring out from under Tammy's garage door. The smoke was thick and dark, the kind that comes from melting wire insulation, not clean wood burning. I knew exactly what was happening. The 10-gauge copper tap, the one with no breaker protection and no weatherproof connectors, had finally surrendered to the upgraded current flowing through my system. 62 kilowatt hours of solar output pushing through wiring rated for maybe 20. The splice point had overheated, the electrical tape had melted, and the bare copper had ignited the charging cable connected to her Tesla. I dialed 911. "There's a garage fire at 784 to Saguaro Ridge Drive," I said. "Electrical origin, multiple electric vehicles inside. The garage contains lithium-ion batteries. Please advise your crews." The Chandler Fire Department arrived in 7 minutes. 2 engines, a ladder truck, and a hazmat unit because of the lithium-ion battery risk. By the time they got the garage door open, the NEMA outlet had melted into a black lump on the wall. 2 of the charging cables were actively burning, and the front end of the white Tesla Model X was scorched from the bumper to the windshield. The heat had cracked the panoramic glass roof. The other 3 vehicles had been disconnected in time by a neighbor who'd run in with an extinguisher before the department arrived. But the damage to the Tesla was total. $105,000 of German-engineered electric luxury, reduced to a smoking shell because Tammy Bridgewater couldn't be bothered to hire a licensed electrician. The fire investigator arrived Saturday morning. His name was Captain Luis Fuentes. He spent 4 hours examining the origin point, the wiring, and the connection to my property. His conclusion, written in his official report: fire originated from an unauthorized, unpermitted electrical splice connecting the residential solar array at 784 Saguaro Ridge Drive to a non-code compliant outlet at 784 Saguaro Ridge Drive. The splice lacked overcurrent protection, utilized non-rated conductors, and showed evidence of sustained thermal overloading. The fire was caused by the unauthorized connection, not by the solar installation, which was found to be in full code compliance with all applicable county and state standards. He knocked on my door before he left. "Mr. Holloway, did you know about this connection?" "I did," I said. "I discovered it 6 months ago. I sent the homeowner a certified letter warning her to remove it. I also filed a complaint with the Registrar of Contractors. I have copies of everything." He nodded slowly. "You did everything right." 3 days later, on Tuesday evening, the Desert Bluff Estates annual homeowners meeting convened at the community clubhouse. 142 homeowners attended, standing room only. The fire had made the neighborhood email chains light up like a switchboard, and everyone wanted answers. Tammy stood at the podium. She was wearing a black blazer, no jewelry, no smile. She opened with a prepared statement blaming the fire on a defect in the community's shared electrical infrastructure. That's when I stood up. "Point of order," I said. "I'd like to present documentation relevant to the board president's statement." Tammy's eyes locked onto mine. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked afraid. I walked to the front of the room, carrying a 3-ring binder. Behind me, Ward Pemberton was already setting up a laptop connected to the projector. I'd prepared a 20-slide presentation with every piece of evidence I'd gathered over 7 months. The photographs of the illegal tap, the monitoring data showing the power theft, the certified letter she'd ignored, the fire marshal's report, the fire investigator's report, the fake compliance inspectors, the unlicensed law firm, the financial records showing $52,000 in embezzlement, the emails between Tammy and Clayton Mercer, the bribery attempt on the county inspector, the Venmo charging scheme, and the security footage of her Tesla destroying my mailbox at 2 a.m. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't editorialize. I just clicked through the slides and let the evidence speak. Halfway through the presentation, Tammy grabbed her purse and tried to walk out. She made it to the back door before she found it blocked by 2 deputies from the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office. Standing next to them was an investigator from the county attorney's office and Shelley Caldwell from the Arizona Republic, notepad open, pen moving. "Tammy Bridgewater," the lead deputy said, "you're under arrest for theft of utilities, embezzlement of HOA funds, and attempted bribery of a public official." The room was silent. 142 people watched Tammy Bridgewater get handcuffed in the doorway of the clubhouse she'd ruled for 9 years. Her pearl earrings caught the fluorescent light as the deputy turned her around. Her leather portfolio fell from under her arm and hit the floor with a flat, hollow sound that echoed through the room like a gavel. Nobody moved, nobody spoke. Then, from somewhere in the middle of the crowd, someone started clapping. 1 person, then 5, then the whole room. Tammy Bridgewater was charged with 5 felonies: theft of utilities over $1,000, embezzlement, attempted bribery of a public official, fraudulent use of HOA funds, and criminal damage to property for the mailbox. She was released on bail but barred from holding any HOA position in Maricopa County pending trial. Her attorney, a real one this time, licensed in Arizona, negotiated a plea deal 6 months later. She got 3 years of probation, full restitution of the $52,000 to the HOA, and 200 hours of community service. The judge also issued a permanent injunction barring her from serving on any HOA board in the state of Arizona. Darren Bridgewater resigned from the Planning Commission before the ethics investigation could formally begin. The zoning variance he'd voted to approve was reopened for review, and Clayton Mercer's development project was put on hold pending an audit of all related approvals. Darren was never charged criminally, but his political career was finished. The Bridgewaters listed their house for sale in January. It sold in March to a retired teacher from Tucson, who immediately joined the neighborhood book club and has never once filed a complaint about anyone's roof. The white Tesla Model X was declared a total loss. Insurance denied the claim. The policy excluded coverage for damage resulting from illegal modifications to residential electrical systems. Tammy had voided her own coverage the day she spliced into my junction box. As for me, I got a check from the county attorney's restitution fund for the electricity she'd stolen. It came to $4,311. I used part of it to replace my mailbox. The new one is steel reinforced. But the money wasn't the point. It was never about money. After the dust settled, Ward Pemberton and I sat on my porch drinking coffee on a Sunday morning. The sky was that clean Arizona blue, the kind that goes on forever and makes you feel like the world still has room to breathe. Colton was out front teaching the neighbor's kid how to use a voltage tester, explaining the difference between AC and DC, with the patience of a kid who'd spent too many weekends handing his dad tools on a roof. "What do you want to do with the board now?" Ward asked. He'd been elected interim president by a unanimous vote. First thing he'd done was waive every outstanding fine against every homeowner. "I want to build something," I said. We launched the Desert Bluff Community Solar Co-op the following month. The idea was simple. Homeowners who wanted solar but couldn't afford a full installation could buy into a shared array built on the clubhouse roof. The co-op would sell surplus power back to the grid and use the credits to reduce everyone's utility bills. Ward handled the paperwork. I designed the system and supervised the installation. 14 families signed up in the first 2 weeks. We also started an electrical safety education fund. Once a quarter, I host a free workshop at the clubhouse. Basic home wiring, how to read your breaker panel, how to spot unlicensed electrical work, what to do if someone tampers with your property. The workshops are free and open to the whole community. Last month, 31 people showed up. One of them brought cookies. Elena would have loved that. She was the one who always said that the best thing you can build isn't a house or a system or a career. It's a neighborhood where people look out for each other. I didn't fully understand what she meant until I watched a room full of strangers applaud the end of something rotten and the beginning of something better. Colton asked me the other night if we were going to move again. I told him no. This is home now. He smiled, the kind of real unguarded smile I hadn't seen from him since before his mother got sick. And for the first time in 3 years, that smile didn't make me sad. It made me ready. If you've ever dealt with an HOA president who thought the rules only applied to everyone else, drop your story in the comments. I promise you're not alone. And if you want to hear what happened when a retired sheriff's deputy discovered his HOA board was running an illegal short-term rental operation out of the community pool house, hit that subscribe button. That one's coming next.
Here's the thing about people like Tammy Bridgewater. They don't start out stealing $52,000 or bribing county officer. They start with a clipboard and a title. They start by telling you your fence is the wrong shade of brown, and when nobody pushes back, they take another step until they're ripping the cover off your function box, believing they have every right to do it. Garrett didn't beat her with anger. He beat her with paperwork, patience, and a voting meter. When someone with a little power decides to come up to you, your best weapon isn't a confrontation. It's a fire. Build it, date it, back it up. Let them keep making mistakes while you keep taking notes. The community ended up stronger for it. A solo co-op, free safety workshops, a neighborhood that actually talks to each other instead of fearing the next letter in the mailbox. That's what happens when one person decides that building something matters more than burning something down. If you have an HOA president who thought she was above the law, tell me your story in the comments. I read everyone. Hit that subscribe button, because next week, a retired sheriff's deputy discovered his HOA was running an illegal rental operations out of the community poorhouse. You don't want to miss this.